So let's talk about the importance of having a closed racket face when you're trying to hit consistent topspin forehands and backhands. Now, to help me demonstrate this, I've got the Topspin Pro. To get your own for at-home practice, just use my link. It's in the description. I'm also going to pin it in the first comment. So when you hit a ball, you can have one of three positions at contact when it comes to your racket orientation. And I want you to think of my racket being a mirror for this demonstration. If my racket or my mirror is reflecting the sky and the clouds, that is an open racket face. If my mirror is reflecting the ground, that is a closed racket face. And if my racket is perfectly straight up and down, able to balance a penny on the end, a coin, then that is a square racket. So this is open, closed, and square. When you are hitting the ball, it's in your best interest to have the racket straight up and down as you're striking the ball. Now you can be slightly on either side of square depending on the shot that you're going for. For instance, if you're going to go for a topspin lob up over someone's head and try to make it bounce behind them, you want your racket face a few degrees open. Not a lot, but a little. And if you're going to dip the ball at someone's feet with a ton of racket speed, it's in your best interest that your racket face is ever so slightly closed as you're striking the ball. You watch the pros with how fast they swing. They often have the racket face slightly tilted downward as they're striking the ball. Now, the reason the ball will go over the net is because of how much speed and racket speed they're swinging with, and the friction and the pressure and compression through contact will actually drag that ball up over the net. But all in all, you want to think of the racket being straight up and down at contact when hitting a topspin forehand or backhand. So how do we do that? How do we produce a straight up and down racket face? Well, it's in your best interest to tilt your strings down in the back in order to make that happen. Recently, I received a comment in a video I made about a year ago, and it's actually on Zverev's forehand, talking about the #1 key to hitting topspin forehands. And it was all about the closed racket face. And the comment said, in, paraphrasing, basically, wouldn't it make more sense to have the racket straight up and down in the back as a way to make the racket straight up and down at contact? It seems so much easier, and it does on paper, when writing a comment. But it doesn't work in application on the tennis court because you'd have to use a court that has no net. The reason you would have to have no net is because if your racket is straight up and down and you swing straight into the ball to get your racket straight up and down and have your racket square, the ball will go directly forward off your racket. Gravity is really good at tennis, and the moment the ball leaves your racket, it will begin dropping and your ball will hit the ground before it even reaches the net. So we have to have an upward component. Tennis is a lifting game. When the ball comes off of our racket, we need it to go up. We don't hit balls forward, we hit them up, and then gravity and spin bring the ball down. We have to hit the ball up over the net. The net is higher than we think. Hit it up, and then gravity and spin bring it down. So we have to be swinging from below contact to above contact, not straight in to the ball. So closing the racket face is how we swing to the ball by going up, but we ensure a square racket face. See, your racket will always be more open at contact than it was in the back. And it's just simply because our arm is a pendulum. Well, it's a radius, but at the bottom, it's a pendulum. So as we're swinging, our hand opens up. So whatever position you have prior to contact, let's say my racket is pointing down at 45 degrees. It's closed at 45 degrees. My racket, if it's closed at 45 in the back, will be square at contact. That's just because of the pendulum effect. Think of a putter. When you're golfing, the putter is slightly closed, then the putter is slightly open. It's just the natural movement of the way our arms move. If your racket is straight up and down in the back, and now you're going to try to hit topspin, what you will end up doing is swinging to the ball, but now your racket face is going to be open. And if the racket was closed at 45 degrees in the back, and that produced a square racket face, then a square racket face will end up being open at 45 degrees. This is why beginners always hit the ball over the fence, because they think, well, I need my racket square at contact, so why not start with the racket square? But then the racket ends up being open when they strike the ball. Now, this is something very interesting about beginners, because beginners know, oh, I'm going to try to figure out how to get my strings to face forward. So what beginners do, or players who are lower level intermediates, they will swing to the ball with their racket face open, and at the last second they try to turn the racket and they try to roll the racket. You want to talk about perfecting a timing of the swing? That requires incredible timing, because you are changing the racket face from open to square to closed in a very short amount of time. A much shorter amount of time than if you just have your racket closed in the back and you try to get your racket square when you're striking the ball. The change in the racket face when you just tilt your strings down and swing up is much more gradual than if your racket is straight up and down, and when you get to the ball it's open and you try to turn it. Much harder to time it. If you're someone who sometimes you hit the ball and the ball goes over the fence, and sometimes you hit the ball and the ball hits the bottom of the net, and sometimes you hit the ball and it's a perfect shot and you're like, why can't I do that every time? It's because you can't, because most likely your racket is straight up and down. It's no different on the backhand, whether it's two-hander or one-hander. When your strings are tilted down prior to hitting the ball, they will be square as you strike. And yes, does it require timing? Of course. Tennis is a sport. It requires timing. You can't get away from the timing component. Tennis is a timing sport. You have to swing at the right time, and you have to get your strings to face your target at the right time. That's why Roger Federer has a $300 million clothing contract and I don't, because he's a lot better at it than I am. But if you're someone who is struggling with consistent ground strokes, go out and film yourself, and I advise you, and I'll show you from the back, I advise you to film yourself from the back. And what you should see is your racket face closed at about 45 degrees prior to hitting the ball. And that is going to ensure that your strings are square as you strike. Now, we talked about the variance and how sometimes you want to hit the ball with your racket face slightly closed. Sometimes you want to hit it with it slightly open, and sometimes you want it to be square. Look, pros are pros because they're really good at very small and minute details. When you drop the racket, if you drop a little bit less than 45 degrees, that will naturally end up being open for a topspin lob. If when you drop the racket, you turn your palms a little bit more toward the ground, that means at contact, your strings will be slightly closed. So you can get a lot of RPM and spin on that ball to dip the ball to someone's feet. It's no different on the forehand. If you're someone who is trying to hit a topspin lob, only close your racket face a little bit. That way, when you swing up to the ball, your racket face is a little bit open. If you tilt your strings down a lot, then your strings will be slightly closed when you strike the ball. And of course, 45 degrees ends up being basically square against the back of the ball. The reason closing the racket face helps you is because you don't have to roll the racket or do anything. All you have to do is swing up to the ball, and you can be a little bit late, you can be a little bit early, and there's a window of opportunity called the strike zone where the ball will still land in. If your racket's straight up and down, and when you get to the ball, you try to turn the racket, the window is so short where the ball is going to go somewhere low or high over the net that the timing is nearly impossible. Now, if you're looking for new people in your local area to play matches against or practice with, or if you want to find a coach who's close to you who can help you with your game and help you close the racket face on your forehand and backhand, then use my link for PlayYourCourt. And it's playyourcourt.com/2minutetennis. When you use my link to sign up, you get 50% off. In my experience, most recreational tennis players do not close their racket face, which is why they're frustrated with their ground strokes. Tilt your strings down, keep them feeling like they're tilted down until you get to the ball where the racket's square, and then swing up. No different on the forehand as well. You practice the closed racket face, there's no doubt. You're going to gain confidence, win more matches, and play much better tennis. This is Ryan Reedy from 2minutetennis.net. You got this.